A while back, I came across a story online on one of those pizza making forums, written by a guy who had met with Dom DeMarco Sr., the founder of DiFara Pizzeria in Brooklyn. And he said, this is from like 15 years ago, but he relayed the story about how he talked with Dom and he was very generous of his time. And he told this guy exactly how he makes pizza. And then this guy told everybody how he did it. And to me, it seemed very sincere. I don't think the guy was making it up at all. And a few things that I want to point out is DeFara is using 65% hydration. For flour, he's using 75% Caputo's 00 and 25% all trumps. He uses no oil in the dough. And he didn't say anything about sugar. I'm going to assume he's not using any sugar because he seemed like an old school guy. And the old school guys didn't use sugar. That's just my assumption. But the most interesting thing was that he said Dom only lets the dough proof for 1 to 2 hours. And I'm like, is that a typo? Is that real? I was curious. And by the way, I'm going to leave the link to this discussion in the video description so you can go read it yourself if you'd like. But I don't know if that guy remembered wrong or what. I was curious. I was thinking about it for a few days. And I just said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to call up DeFara and see what they have to say. So after a couple of tries, I got Dom Jr. on the phone. Dom Sr., the founder, passed away a few years back. His son runs the place now, Dom Jr. Dom Jr. was very nice, super just friendly and generous with his time. He talked to me for a few minutes. I don't want to waste too much of his time. I called him up right before the place closed, and I was mainly just interested in the proofing time for the dough. So I talked to him about it, and sure enough, he said he goes for about a 2 hour proof. That's all. He also, so in the forum that I read, the guy mentioned that Dom Sr. never used weights to measure ingredients. He just used volume. And from what I gathered from Dom Jr., that's what he does too, because he was saying, if it's a hot day, I just take a handful of yeast, but it's a smaller handful, I throw it in there. But on a cold day, I'll take a bigger handful of yeast and toss it in there. So that's how they do things over there. It seems like just about everybody has in their mind an idea of what the perfect New York pizza slice should be like. The crust, the density, the airiness, the color, everything. But the truth is, we've got quite a large spectrum of options, varieties in New York pizza. And DiFara may be on one end of the spectrum I'm sure they are, one end of the spectrum for rise time, 2 hour rise. That's really short. So I was curious. I wanted to try it out myself. So I improvised a little bit. I eliminated the sugar and oil from this recipe I tried today. I increased the yeast. And when it was all said and done with the oven warming up, the dough was rising for 2 hours and 20 minutes before I put it in the oven, before I shaped it and put it in the oven. And take a look. So first off, this is a picture I took from DiFara in Manhattan. There's 2 locations, one in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan. Dom Jr. did mention that he runs the place in Brooklyn and his sister runs the place in Manhattan, and he says it's just a tiny bit different in Manhattan. So, but take a look here first. This is from the Manhattan location when I was there a few months ago. You'll notice that the crust color is quite light and the rim is pretty flat. Not a lot of air. Here's a picture I found online from the Brooklyn location. It looks about the same to me. You can tell the crust is light and kind of flat. There were pictures on there of darker crust, but it was obvious the oven was much, much hotter when those were baked. And also it was like the cheese and toppings were like really baked. Like it was in the oven for quite a long time. So, but the reason the crust looks lighter, I've learned through previous experiments, is from the 00 flour. 00 flour is a lot more resistant to heat, and it just doesn't brown up like bread flour does or all-purpose flour does. That's why it looks lighter. When I was experimenting with 00 flour and mixtures earlier, another trait, was that the rim didn't poof up as much as only with bread flour for whatever reason. The rim is always flatter for me when I use 00 flour. However, the dough was really quite strong. It was a lot stronger than I thought. Strong and stretchy. And that was because of the 00 flour. That stuff is so cohesive and stretchy. If you use only bread flour or all-purpose flour, it would tear really easy. I know that from experience too. And oil is not necessary with 00 flour. In fact, when the Italians came over from Italy, they realized that the American flour was not as strong. It didn't bond as strong as the 00 flour. So that's when they started to add a fat to it to make it bond stronger and become more elastic. Originally, they would use lard, but now people just use olive oil or some type of oil. So that's that. When I tasted it, as expected, it's not as flavorful as a dough that ferments for multiple days. We've talked about that before, but it worked. I mean, DiFara has been selling pizza for decades to people lining up out the door to buy their stuff, and it's good. It's just a little bit different than what I usually make. But again, it'd be very arrogant of me to say that one's better than another. It's just a different style, different method. So I thought that was interesting. Thought I'd share that with you. And as a side note, this has nothing to do with pizza, but it's just kind of fun because when I was thinking about this and putting my pictures together, I took this picture right here of DiFara when I was there. This is the Manhattan location on Front Street. And I swore it looked so familiar. And I finally realized, even when I was there a few months ago, it looked familiar. I finally realized where that scene came from, why it was familiar to me. And I grew up watching those Home Alone movies. Some of you probably did too. Home Alone 2, there's a scene where little Kevin McAllister's walking across the fish market, Fulton Street Fish Market, and those two bad guys make their first appearance in the movie. That's that. This is the scene. He's walking across Front Street. Notice the Brooklyn Bridge in the background and that overhead elevated street thing to the right. This is exactly where DiFara in Manhattan is now, on Front Street. So just a little side bit. That was kind of fun for me to figure that out, make that connection. Let me know what you think. Talk to you later.